The judge thought she was silencing a symbol, but within minutes it was her courtroom that fell silent. Before we dive in, subscribe to the channel and stay with us to the end. What begins as a routine day for Pam Bondi spirals into a moment that challenges the justice system itself and sets off a national firestorm. He thought it would be a simple observation job, but the courtroom had other plans. The soft hum of a Florida morning filtered through the open windows of Pam Bondi's office. She sat quietly, reviewing case files, her mind far from controversy. Though no longer Florida's Attorney General, Pam remained deeply involved in legal advocacy, serving as a trusted advisor to conservative leaders and a fierce defender of constitutional rights. Her phone buzzed. A name flashed. W.H. Chief Counsel. She answered. Pam Bondi. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. Pam, we need eyes on a hearing in D.C. today. A group of Christians is suing over being banned from holding prayer rallies in a public square. The judge? Evelyn Caro. You've heard of her. Pam's brows narrowed. Progressive firebrand in robes? Yeah, heard of her. We think she'll try something. We'd like someone in the room who knows what to look for. She didn't hesitate. Text me the details. I'm on it. Pam changed into her courtroom-appropriate attire, navy blue blazer, white blouse, and a small, elegant American flag cross pin on her lapel. It was a gift from her late mother. She wore it often, never imagining it would become the spark that ignited a national moment. She tossed her legal pad and phone into her leather bag and headed for the airport. A few hours later, she landed in Washington, D.C., the air cooler, the tension thicker. As her car pulled up to the courthouse steps, Pam's expression was unreadable, calm, professional, but ready. She came to watch justice unfold. She didn't know she was about to become the story. From the moment she walked in, the judge noticed her, and not in a good way. The marble floors of the D.C. courthouse echoed under her heels as Pam stepped inside. She scanned the room. A mix of cases were underway, tenant disputes, minor violations, and one headline case buried quietly on the docket, Faith for All versus the City of Washington. Pam took a seat in the third row, halfway between the front and exit, always strategic. Around her, the usual crowd. One man wore a neon orange hoodie with political slogans splattered across the back. A woman had jewelry that clinked louder than the judge's gavel ever would. No one batted an eye. Pam pulled out her pad, her phone, and crossed one leg over the other. She glanced at the judge's bench, still empty. The door creaked. In walked Judge Evelyn Caro, mid-50s. Black robe pristine, glasses perched low on her nose, silver hair tightly coiled into a bun. Her presence was sharp, unforgiving. The room hushed. She sat without looking at anyone. Court is in session, she declared, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. And let me remind everyone, this is a court of law, not a stage for personal expression. Pam's eyes met Caro's briefly. A flicker of recognition passed between them, subtle and silent, but not missed. Pam jotted down a note. She saw me. She didn't like it. Caro began with speed, clearing minor cases in seconds. Her tone was clipped, impatient. Then came a pause. Her eyes scanned the room again and stopped. On Pam. Caro leaned forward slightly. Miss Bondi, is it? Pam didn't move. Yes, Your Honor. The judge's lips thinned. We'll talk soon. That wasn't a welcome. That was a warning, and Pam knew it. Others wore worse, but only Pam was called out. The next case proceeded like clockwork, until it didn't. Judge Caro paused the hearing, set down her pen, and looked directly at Pam. Miss Bondi, please approach the bench. Pam stood, unsure whether this was official business or something more pointed. She walked forward, calm but cautious. Yes, Your Honor? Caro's tone turned acidic. Your pin, that symbol on your lapel. I trust you're aware that religious or political statements are not permitted in this courtroom. Pam glanced down. This? She asked, lightly touching the American flag cross. It's a personal keepsake. I've worn it for years. Not in my courtroom, Caro snapped. This is a place of law, not belief. Pam kept her voice even. There are no posted rules against symbols of faith, ma'am. I'm not disrupting the court. Caro leaned back, drumming her fingers on the bench. You're disrupting neutrality. Remove it or leave. The crowd stirred. The man in the hoodie looked around, almost amused. Pam didn't flinch. With respect, Your Honor, I'm here to observe a public case. I'm not a participant. And the First Amendment protects religious expression, especially when it's silent. A visible tick flared in Caro's cheek. Sit down, she ordered, tone clipped. We're not done. Pam returned to her seat. Every eye in the room followed her, some in awe, some with unease. Behind her, someone whispered, Didn't say anything about that guy's hoodie. What she wore was legal. What the judge did next was not. She came to observe. Instead, she was fined $500 for disruption. Minutes passed. The next case trudged on, but Judge Caro's focus never left Pam. Then she struck. Miss Bondi, she announced, voice rising, please stand again. Pam stood. This court finds you in contempt for failure to comply with courtroom decorum. A fine of $500 will be issued, payable before departure. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The woman with the chandelier earrings looked stunned. The man with the slogan hoodie shifted awkwardly in his seat. Pam blinked once, slowly. Contempt for a pin? Don't test me, Caro barked. You were warned. Pam took a breath, reached into her purse, and pressed a button on her phone, quietly. The recorder began rolling. This is on record, Judge. Everything in this courtroom is on record, Miss Bondi, including your disrespect. Pam's voice turned sharp but steady. Then let the record show. I am being fined for a silent, constitutionally protected symbol, while others wear louder, flashier, and more offensive displays without reprimand. Caro's gavel slammed the bench like thunder. That's enough. Silence fell again. The clerk froze mid-keystroke. The bailiff looked up. Pam didn't move. She wasn't afraid. She was just getting started. The fine was just the spark. The fire was still coming. Most people would have paid and left. Pam chose to fight back. Pam remained standing, her posture firm, unshaken. The courtroom held its breath. Your Honor, she began, her voice carrying, this fine is not about decorum. It's about discrimination. Judge Caro tilted her head. Careful, Miss Bondi. I suggest you tread lightly. Pam stepped closer to the bench. Not intimidated, but deliberate. Her hand subtly adjusted the phone in her purse to ensure the recording continued. Her eyes never left the judge. I served as Florida's Attorney General for 8 years, Pam said calmly. I've seen my share of legal overreach, but this is personal bias masquerading as order. You are not in a courtroom to give speeches, Caro hissed. No, Pam agreed. I'm here to observe a case on religious freedom, and now I've witnessed a violation of it. The crowd stirred again. Even the clerk paused, pen hanging mid-air. You're escalating this needlessly, Caro warned. Pam nodded once. So be it. But let the record show. I did not break any law. I wore a symbol of faith, and for that, I was singled out. Judge Caro sat back, lips pressed into a tight line. Sit down. We will proceed. Pam returned to her seat. But the atmosphere had changed. She had drawn the line, and the judge had crossed it. The courtroom thought it had silenced her. It had just given her a microphone. Within 30 minutes, the courtroom had turned into a trending topic. Outside the courthouse, a young man live tweeted from the hallway, Pam Bondi just got fined $500 for wearing a faith pin. She's quoting constitutional law to the judge. Unreal. Inside, the murmurs grew louder. Phones buzzed. Hashtags appeared. #Bondistans. #Faith on trial. #Caro bias. By the time court adjourned, tweets had turned into headlines. Within the hour, conservative outlets posted, "Former AG fined for her faith." At the White House, a senior advisor forwarded a link to the president. "Bondi's making waves. Want her on Tucker tonight?" Pam stepped outside, the D.C. sunlight bright in her eyes. Reporters were already gathering. Her phone lit up with messages. One text stood out. "We're behind you. Get ready for tonight." She knew what that meant. They weren't letting this die in silence. Neither was she. She came to watch a case. She had just become the face of it. Her case wasn't the first, but it might be the last straw. By that afternoon, the D.C. Judicial Review Board received an official complaint. Filed by Pamela Jo Bondi. Subject: Bias and Abuse of Discretion by Judge Evelyn Caro. Inside the board's office, veteran investigator Linda Martinez read the complaint with furrowed brows. A stack of earlier concerns about Caro rested in a drawer nearby, previously dismissed. But this one came with audio, tweets, witnesses. Linda called in her team. "We're not brushing this one aside. Dig into Caro's rulings. Focus on religious cases." By nightfall, they had already uncovered patterns. Over the past 18 months, Judge Caro had fined more people for wearing crosses, hijabs, or religious symbols than for profanity-laced T-shirts or overt political statements. It wasn't a coincidence. Meanwhile, the courthouse clerk, Margaret Thompson, sent an anonymous email to the board. "I've served under Caro for 10 years. She targets religious expression. I have notes. I'll testify." The courthouse bailiff, Ron Davis, followed an hour later with a handwritten affidavit. Pam's complaint was no longer isolated. It was becoming a case study in judicial overreach. Caro thought she was silencing a nuisance. Instead, she awakened an army. The judge tried to crush a symbol. Now she's the one under the gavel. 2 days later, Judge Caro walked into her courtroom as usual, only to be met by a messenger from the D.C. Judicial Council. "Effective immediately. You are suspended pending investigation." Caro didn't speak. Her hands trembled as she accepted the notice. By now, national networks had picked up the story. Interviews with legal scholars aired nightly. A leaked copy of the courtroom audio showed Bondi never raised her voice, never disrupted proceedings, only stood firm. Pam held a press conference outside the courthouse steps. "This is not just about me," she told cameras. "This is about every citizen who's been punished for their beliefs. We cannot allow the court to become a tool for silencing the faithful." Across the country, rallies formed outside courthouses. People wore pins, crosses, and symbols of their faith. Lawmakers called for reviews of courtroom decorum codes. And inside the Judicial Council chambers, Linda Martinez presented her findings. Over 72% of Judge Caro's personal fines were directed at individuals displaying religious symbols, compared to 14% for profanity, 9% for political attire. This is not enforcement. It is bias. The council voted unanimously. Caro's suspension would remain in effect. A full ethics inquiry would proceed. Pam watched the ruling from a quiet hotel room, the cross still on her lapel. She didn't smile. She simply nodded. Justice hadn't been handed to her. She had to force it to look in the mirror. Pam didn't just win her case. She sparked a national awakening. Days after the ruling, images began surfacing across social media. Veterans, students, teachers, and lawyers all wearing crosses, hijabs, stars of David, and other symbols, snapping photos with the hashtag #MyFaithMyRight. Church leaders held vigils in Pam's honor. State legislators drafted bills clarifying the rights of religious expression in courts and public spaces. Even critics who once labeled Pam a political operative now had to admit she had stood for something bigger. News broke that Florida and Texas were reviewing all courtroom decorum violations from the past 5 years. Several judges quietly updated their courtroom guidelines. Pam was invited to speak at Liberty University. She stood at the podium before thousands. Our laws are only as strong as the people willing to defend them. If one voice can spark this, imagine what thousands can do. She left the stage to a standing ovation, her cross gleaming beneath the lights. She hadn't planned on leading a movement, but the truth has a way of making leaders. What started with a fine became a flame, lighting the way for millions. 3 months later, Pam sat in a Senate hearing, invited to testify about judicial fairness and freedom of expression. Across from her sat the same judicial oversight members who had suspended Caro. Pam recounted the events calmly, firmly, and with clear legal precedent. By the end, the chairman said what many were thinking. "Miss Bondi, your courage helped this country see something we had ignored for too long. Thank you." Meanwhile, Caro, now retired, appeared in a private interview. She admitted her mistake. "I thought I was maintaining neutrality. I see now I was silencing what I didn't understand." Pam never gloated. Instead, she issued a public statement. The goal was never to win. It was to remind the system who it serves. At home, the framed $500 fine sat in her office, not as a mark of defeat, but a badge of purpose. Some people wear medals. She wore her faith, and that was enough to shake the nation. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage still matters and that no voice is too small to spark change, then share it. Let others know that freedom of faith is not negotiable. Subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, and tell us, what would you have done in Pam's shoes? Because the fight for freedom isn't over, and next time, the courtroom might be yours.